Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session, Speeding Ahead Without a Plan, When to Stop, Drop, and Plan to Avoid a Disaster. Today's session will be approximately 30 minutes, and it offers half of a PDU for those of you that are here for PDU credits as a certified project management professional. So, for those of you that don't know me, I am Kathleen Moorhead. I am the owner and founder of Peyton Consulting. And my mission is really to educate, share knowledge, collaborate, and communicate with other professionals who are trying to all get things done. I provide project management and leadership training, and I also work individually with organizations to help manage projects and work individually with people to help them either with career decisions, coach them through obtaining new skills and knowledge, and guide them towards the next step of whatever their goals might be. My motto is that I really will only provide information that I have used, information that I find is valuable, and information that I know is applicable in the world that we work in today. So today we're going to be talking about um, that feeling when you know things are moving too fast and what we can do to help recorrect, pivot and recorrect and get on the right path. So I just have some signs up here. You guys can probably all relate to them. We've all felt them, right? So the first is that important choices are being made, and there's not really a lot of information or data or stakeholder input. Like, you know that there's people you should be asking to get more input before you make a decision, but you just don't have the time, or you're being pressured, or people are saying, yeah, just go ahead and do it. And you know that those decisions, you probably would have liked to have gotten a little bit more research, a little bit more data to support the decision. You're in constant firefighting mode. So your team or yourself, you're spending a lot of time reacting to urgent issues. And we're going to talk in a minute about being able to distinguish between urgent and important. And everything is deadline driven. So you're getting arbitrary deadlines that dictate your path forward, right? So when we think about like a well laid out plan or a well laid out thought process, we've already established how long it's going to take to do things. This arbitrary deadlines is, can you get it by next Friday? Can you get it by next Tuesday? Can we have that by next Wednesday? Right? And it doesn't feel like there's any rhyme or reason behind these deadlines. Unclear objectives and ownership. So not everybody's on the same page, right? And so some people might be speaking to a group of individuals about the project on the side. There might be some other ad hoc conversations, and you're trying to figure out what the heck is going on. What are we even trying to do here? So there's some misalignment, some confusion, and there's no shared understanding of what the initiative is intended to do, what the shared goals are, or who's responsible for doing what. And scope creep. So this is when work expands. We're doing things that we didn't really think were associated with the goals of the project, but we're not really sure, right? Because it's never really been laid out, and things just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And just general overall poor communication and coordination, where, as I said, information's maybe siloed, nobody's clear about who decision makers are, and there's constant misunderstandings about what is going on, who's working on what, who's responsible for what the deadlines are, what the timeline is supposed to look like. So this general just chaotic feeling. And I put these questions together because I think this symbolizes you if you can't answer these questions, then maybe it's time to do that pause that we're going to talk about. If you can't answer which tasks need to happen next week to stay on track for the deadline, that's a red flag. If you can't answer who do we need sign off from before the next step, another red flag. Which risks are most significant that could derail us if we don't address them now? right? So if you join the last session when we talked about risks and having transparency, this would be a dream, right? For a sponsor to say, tell me about the risks that are out there, or your project owner, right? For them to approach you and for you to have that opportunity to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you asked because we actually do have some risks. But if you can't even answer that question, you're in trouble and you're moving too fast. What dependencies are we waiting on that might slow things down? Again, right? Being able to identify that and be proactive. But if we don't know what the road ahead looks like, we're going to be unable to answer that question. Which parts of the project could be done in parallel and which must happen sequentially? Right? So if you have a team of people and everybody's running around and nobody's sure who's responsible for what, when work is going to be delivered, you can't answer this question about how can we sequence things? What can we do in parallel and what has to happen before something else can happen? And a key stakeholder or a key project team member, if they leave, I have the name in there, Tom, just as an example. If Tom leaves, how will we adjust without losing time or quality on the project? So just think through these for a minute here and let me pose it from two different perspectives. One is you may be put in a situation where you didn't have time to plan because you have been asked to just do, right? And if you can't answer these questions for your own benefit and your own sanity, that's when you need to stop and plan. But other situations might be that you've been given the project, you've been, you know, expected to assume ownership of the project. The sponsor's not dictating or mandating unrealistic deadlines. And if you can't answer these questions, if they're asked of you by the sponsor, for example, then you haven't done your due diligence in managing the project correctly so that you know where you are at any given point in time on the project. So I called this the fast lane trap and why we skip planning, right? So this just happens. So we get that pressure to act, we get urgent deadlines, we get expectations to push teams to jump in before thinking, right? Just do it. Just get her done. We confuse, and management is guilty of this many times, especially when everybody's busy. But we confuse that busyness to equate to progress. And that constant activity makes everyone feel like we're moving forward, even if we don't have a plan. And when planning feels optional, so when there's actual work that can be done and people know one part of the puzzle, right? So that they know this one piece of the puzzle and they want to just get to doing it. They want hands on, they're doers. That's all well and good, but that doesn't negate the responsibility for planning. Planning's not optional. Planning has to happen in order for things to go correctly. Sometimes planning is seen as a perceived delay. So if we take this amount of time to plan, then we're not going to meet this deadline. And it's actually the exact opposite. If you don't take the time to plan, you're never going to meet that deadline because you're not going to understand all the variables and all the work that has to go into meeting that deadline in a meaningful way. And sometimes it's just the culture, right? Sometimes it's just the habits of the organization and they reward that doing mentality instead of that thoughtful thinking mentality. But stating the obvious, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of rework. There's going to be missed deadlines. There's going to be communication. Morale is going to drop. There's so many symptoms of poor planning when everybody just jumps into that execution phase and doesn't appreciate the planning phase. So what we want to do is we want to transition to this mentality, and I'm sure you guys have heard this before. We want to measure twice and we want to cut once. So just take a breath for a minute and think about what this really means and where it originated from. So it originates from construction, carpentry work, right? So if individuals with limited resources, limited time, just started building things and they didn't do any of the planning and they didn't measure exactly what they needed and they didn't measure twice before they made the final cut on that piece of wood, things wouldn't have been able to have been done. And we're talking this quote goes back, into the 1800s because resources were limited. They didn't have unlimited wood and unlimited supplies. Those were limited resources that need to be valued and cared for and thought about before any action was taken. And I think it's something that I carry with me when I manage projects about the thought that goes into planning because everybody's time is valuable, right? And we want to make sure that we're using that time in the most meaningful way. And we also want to make sure that we're planning things out about how one piece of wood is going to fit with the other piece of wood, right? So that there is alignment there. And yeah, hopefully, if it's not this saying, maybe it's something else that just resonates with you, that you can get that visualization of the importance of the plan. So here's 4 basic things that you can do that are all within your control. It does not rely on anybody else. These are within your control. And it's about pausing. So when we're feeling all of those things that we talked about in the beginning of the session today, about things feeling chaotic, you're not sure what the goals and objectives are, you're not sure who the decision makers are, and you have a responsibility as a leader, whether you're the project manager or a team leader, let's pause. Because pausing is not the same as stopping, right? Especially if the narrative that I've used throughout this session is actually coming to fruition where people are actually working, right? They're doing things because they know they're one piece of the puzzle that needs to get done. That they're still going to do that. But this is on you to take the ownership and the accountability to pause and get it together before proceeding. And remember, you're not delaying anything. Pausing is not the same as stopping. So my first recommendation here is to schedule a pause. Actually block time to take a time out, take a deep breath, and figure out what the heck is going on. Depending on the scope and the size of the project or the initiative or the situation that you're in, this could be 15 minutes. This could be 45 minutes. This could be an hour. This could be a half of a day. Okay, but block that time where this is going to be your focus time to sit down and think this through. The second is to put things into perspective, right? So to assess the impact and what truly matters and what's just noise. What are the most ruminating things that are making things so stressful? And be able to list out what is really important and put in another bucket things, okay, that this might be going on, but I'm not going to be addressing this right now. Or I'm going to get to this phase 2, but right now I just need to identify what's important. Third is to reconnect the goal. So make sure you have clarity about the objectives, the scope of the project, the success criteria. What are the agreed to deliverables of this initiative? What's the end result? Why are we doing all of this? Why am I sitting in a room by myself trying to figure this out? Because I'm trying to bring the team together to do X. I need to produce Y, right? Make sure that you're able to identify, and 2 and 3 kind of will tie together once you start thinking. And then be able to prioritize with purpose. And that means differentiating between what's urgent and what's important. So when I think about this, I think about urgent as something that has to be done and it has to be done today. That's urgent. If something can wait till, and maybe your definition of urgent, right? Maybe it's going to be, it has to be done this week. Again, depending on what the scope and the size of the initiative is. But putting a parameter about what has to get done. There's going to be lots and lots of things that are super important to get done, but they're not urgent. They can be scheduled, right? And for those of you that have worked with me and before, I always reference the Eisenhower matrix, right? And that's a quadrant where you're taking urgent and important things on your to-do list and you're categorizing them. Because if we try to do everything that we think is urgent, nothing becomes important. And conversely, if we try to do everything that we think is important, nothing is urgent. So we need to differentiate between the two. And as you go through those four steps, right? So you're pausing, you're assessing, what's really going on versus just the noise, and you're differentiating between what's important and urgent. I'm trying to, and reconnecting to the goal about the scope and success criteria. Think about using some very, very, very basic project management fundamental tools to get things back under control. So I am not suggesting in these situations where, the things are just going too fast that you get your license for Microsoft Project and you create a huge Gantt chart and you stop and halt the whole entire project. I'm not suggesting any of that. This is intended to give you tools that you can use that are kind of lightweight tools, but can help with clarity tremendously. So the first is check-in meetings. I have planning meetings. You could call them status meetings. You could call them, whatever resonates with you or your organization. But just get 10 minutes. Maybe it's every day for a couple of weeks. Maybe it's every other day. Just in Agile, we call them stand-up meetings, right? So they're just meetings where you're checking in to see how things are going and to kind of get your head around the project and the initiative and where things are at. That's easy. Schedule it now, get it on people's calendars. Maybe everybody can't attend at first, but as time goes on, they'll be more likely to be able to. Decision gates, right? So decision gates are points in the timeline, points in the project where we're not moving ahead until we have confirmation that we're headed in the right direction. We're not moving ahead until we've reviewed what we have to date to make sure that we're still staying on track, right? These decision gates, you can have 15 of them, you can have 2 of them, but they're checkpoints. And it's reassurance for you as a project manager or as a leader to know that, okay, we're making the right momentum and we're moving in the right direction. Again, things you can do on your own. Success criteria. So going back to what we said before, how are we going to know if we're headed in the right direction? How do I know that this is the work that's meaningful and is going to lead us down the right path? We have to know what that success criteria is. And some of the tools that I have here, like the charter is the best way to get pen to paper and to get somebody to look at documentation and get agreement and consensus on it. So if you're midway through a project and there's no project charter, there's nothing in writing that says anything about what the success criteria is, why we're doing this, draft it and say, I just realized that, it might be helpful for us all to get on the same page. I just drafted the lightweight charter. And can we review this at our next meeting and just make sure that we're all on the same page. A RACI, roles and responsibility matrix. Again, there seems to be some confusion about who's responsible for making decisions, who's responsible for doing certain tasks. So I just drafted this quick RACI. Can we just take a minute and make sure we're all aligned? Right? These will bring about great clarification. And I truly believe that people will say thank you, because if you're feeling that frustration and that miscommunication, obviously others are as well. Do a risk scan, right? Do a high level when you're taking that pause and you're thinking about the project. Just pen to paper, write down 5, 10, 15 risks of things that potentially could happen to impact the project. Bring that risks registry or risk scan to the team. Have them add additional ones. Again, it's going to spark conversation and you're going to start to regain some control and develop a high level plan, right? So it could be a one pager. It could just be here's the 10 things that we need to do. Here's some target dates by which we're going to try to do them by. That's better than having nothing. So that by no means is going to solve everything else. And obviously, you'd like to do a more structured plan, a work breakdown schedule, identify all the dependencies and the milestones, and know, if something impacts X, what's the impact going to be to everything else on the project. But at the very least, again, if you're in the throes of it and you are just trying to keep your head above water, just pull out a piece of paper, take 15 minutes, and just try to focus on this and just get down the high level tasks and deliverables that um, you believe would make sense. And again, share it, right? What am I missing? What else should be on here? Are we headed in the right direction? People will appreciate you taking control and trying to keep things organized. Everybody wants to know what's going on. Nobody wants to be in the dark about things. So, key takeaways. The biggest one is plan to move faster. So think about those words, right? We really don't think we just want to start running. We just want to start doing, and others expect that of us. But if we actually take the time to plan and we use some of the strategies and the tools that I mentioned, then ultimately we will move faster. And we will be in that execution phase, but we'll be running with purpose. We'll understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we're working towards. So the first takeaway really is pausing is powerful, right? So if you're feeling that frustration, if you feel like things are moving too quickly, you feel like you don't have control of the situation, just pause. And pausing is not stopping, right? Pausing is just focused energy and attention on reflecting on what's in front of you and then coming up with a plan about how to move forward. Small doses of planning, right? I'm not recommending Microsoft Project. You're in the throes of it. You need to figure things out. Just do those small things, the check-ins, the checkpoints. Do a RACI chart, roles and responsibilities. Create the charter, right? These are things that you can do and they're within your control. You want people to provide feedback, you want them to review, you want to make it a better product, but you can take the initiative to implement some of these smaller things. And third is sustainable momentum, right? You want to be able to get the team on board. Everybody's kind of looking in the same direction. You know where you're headed, and that's where you're going to pick up the momentum and the speed to keep the project moving forward. So I hope that you found some of the information that I shared helpful and some good takeaways. It happens to all of us. We're just asked to do something, and the expectation is that we hit the ground running. And this whole concept of planning sometimes is put on the sideline, or they think because you're good at what you do, you don't need to have a plan in place. But that's being neglectful to what is really important about the project and why projects break down 90% of the time is because of communication. So that planning piece is not just about the work that has to be done and how the puzzle pieces are going to fit together, but also about the people that are involved and the communication to them about expectations, impact, um, and lots of subject matter experts are typically involved in projects, when to bring them in, when to solicit their input. So it all comes together. So I will be doing another session in November, and that is going to be on AI, and looking at using AI in our day-to-day work as project managers and leaders, and some of the tips and things that we need to think about as we use AI in our work. So I encourage you to follow me on social media. You can take an image of the QR code on the left-hand side of the screen, and that will bring you to all the social media sites. Love to connect with any of you to talk through anything that you might be dealing with, and I'm happy to help wherever I can. And I encourage you, if you or your organization could benefit from time with me with a larger group of folks for on-site or virtual training on any project management related topics or leadership related topics, I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss that as well. I hope you found this time together valuable and useful, and I hope that the information is applicable to the work that you're doing and that you can apply it. And I look forward to seeing you at the next session. Take care, everyone.